Ukraine's Bohdana howitzers flood the front. It is Monday, February 2026, and the entire landscape of the war in Europe is shifting under the weight of some serious heavy metal. Before we jump in, a quick message for everyone listening who wants to stay ahead of the curve and support the truth. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Arya in the latest podcast by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdowns of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover...
Well, we're covering a story that honestly sounds like it was ripped from a movie script. We are talking about the massive surge in Ukraine's domestic artillery production, specifically the Tu-22 Bohdana. As of right now, February 2026, production has hit a record, 40 units per month.
It's a staggering figure. I mean, it really is, especially when you step back and think about it. We're talking about a system that was effectively a ghost, a single experimental prototype that was literally slated for destruction when the invasion began, and now it's becoming the absolute backbone of their artillery corps. Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to look way beyond just that number 40 a month. I really want to understand how Ukraine pulled this off. This isn't just about factories cranking out widgets. It's about how they built what they call a sovereign arsenal while under constant missile attack.
It's a case study in industrial resilience, honestly. We're going to trace how this gun evolved from that one single prototype to the machine that liberated Snake Island.
And we have got some wild details coming up. We are absolutely going to talk about the Frankenstein evolution of this truck, how it had to change its body 4 different times just to survive supply chain collapses. And here's a teaser that I just love. We're going to explain the Danish model.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It sounds like some dry economic theory.
Yeah.
But it's actually how frozen Russian assets are literally paying for the weapons destroying Russian positions right now.
It is economic warfare at its absolute finest. But before we get to the finance part, we have to understand the scale of what's happening on the ground today.
All right, let's unpack that big number. 40 Bohdana units per month. To someone who doesn't follow this stuff, 40 sounds like, I don't know, a classroom size. Is that actually significant?
Oh, it's massive. To give you some context, let's rewind to 2023. At that time, Ukraine was scraping by, struggling to produce maybe 6 of these units a month.
6?
6. Even as recently as May 2024, hitting 10 units a month was considered this huge national victory. So jumping from 10 to 40 by early 2026, that's a quadrupling of capacity in a very, very short window. President Zelensky confirmed this rate himself.
And that fundamentally changes the math on the battlefield.
Completely.
So what does that actually look like for the soldiers? For a long time, the narrative was that Ukraine was operating a logistical zoo, a mix of everything from everywhere.
And that is exactly the nightmare this solves. Think about those early days. A battery commander might have, say, 2 American M777s, 1 French Caesar, a German PZH-2000.
Right, all great guns on their own.
But a maintenance catastrophe when you put them together. Sure, they all shoot 155mm shells, but they're totally different machines. If the French gun breaks, you need French parts and a French mechanic.
So you have guns sitting silent just because you don't have the right wrench for that specific model.
Precisely. It creates a very brittle force. But now, domestic weapons, specifically the Bohdana, make up 40% of all artillery systems on the front line.
40%. Almost half the fleet is now standardized.
Almost half. And the goal is to hit 50% by the end of this year. Strategically, this is about moving away from reliance on fluctuating foreign aid.
That makes sense.
If the U.S. Congress is deadlocked or a European election changes the government, Ukraine's production lines don't stop. And it solidifies the shift from the old Soviet 152mm caliber to the NATO-standard 155mm.
Which opens up a whole world of ammunition for them.
It opens up the entire Western supply chain, which is just vital.
So instead of waiting for a part to be shipped from a warehouse in Germany, they can fix it right there.
Exactly. The blueprints, the factories, the mechanics, it's all in country. But wow, the road to get here was incredibly bumpy. The Bohdana almost didn't make it to the fight at all.
This is my favorite part of the story. The origin reads like an action thriller. So it started development back in 2016, right?
Correct. After 2014, Ukraine realized it had this massive vulnerability. They were running out of Soviet ammo and couldn't make the guns themselves. So the Kramatorsk plant took on the challenge, but it wasn't easy. I mean, they had to figure out how to make rifled barrels from Ukrainian steel, something they had never actually done before.
And they showed it off at a parade in 2018. Everyone clapped, but then nothing. production hell.
It was a classic development struggle, metal production issues, a lack of 155mm shells to even test the thing, legal fights. It just dragged on for years. So by the time February 2022 rolled around, there was exactly one working prototype. Just one.
And here's where it gets crazy. The Russian army is advancing, chaos is everywhere, and the general staff issues a direct order about that prototype.
The order was explicit.
What was it?
Destroy it.
Destroy their only domestic 155mm gun. Why?
Well, it makes military sense. You're at the Kramatorsk factory in the east. The front is collapsing. You absolutely do not want the Russians to capture your cutting-edge technology and parade it around Moscow.
The protocol is to scuttle the equipment.
Right, but they didn't do it.
They disobeyed.
They disobeyed, or let's call it a creative workaround. The manufacturers disassembled the gun, put the pieces on civilian trucks, and drove it west to Zhytomyr. They reassembled it in the rear and basically said to the army, here, we didn't blow it up, use it.
That is a massive risk. If that gun had been captured, they'd be facing a court-martial.
For sure. But instead, that single gun, the Ghost prototype, ended up playing the lead role in one of the most famous battles of the early war.
Snake Island.
Snake Island, June 2022. This was the battle baptism for the Bohdana, and you have to picture the scene. The island is 37.5 kilometers off the coast. The Bohdana has a range of about 40 clicks. It's right at the absolute limit.
And the coast there is not exactly a stable firing position.
No, it's the Danube Delta. Swamps, reeds, mud. To get it within range, they actually put the prototype on a barge.
On a barge, you're kidding.
A massive artillery piece floating on a barge, trying to stabilize enough to fire a precision shot. It was incredibly risky.
One bad recoil and the whole thing could just tip over.
They fired 48 shells over several days with a Bayraktar drone spotting for them. And against all odds, it worked. They knocked out Russian positions, forcing them to withdraw in what they famously called a goodwill gesture.
I love that irony. The gun that was ordered to be destroyed ends up liberating strategic territory. It just speaks to that Ukrainian spirit of, we'll figure it out.
It really does. But one gun doesn't win a war. They needed hundreds. And that led to the next massive hurdle, the truck. You can't have a mobile howitzer without the mobile part.
Right, the Lego evolution.
Yeah.
Looking at the photos, the Bohdana looks different almost every year. It's like it keeps changing its clothes.
That's because the chassis of the truck it sits on kept changing based on pure survival. Bohdana 1.0, the prototype, was on a KRAZ 63221.
The big, boxy Ukrainian truck.
Right. But the KRAZ company went bankrupt. They physically couldn't build new trucks, so you have a gun but nothing to carry it.
So for 2.0, what did they do?
They improvised. Bohdana 2.0 used a MAZ 6317. And the irony here is just, it's thick. These were leftover Belarusian chassis found in warehouses.
Wait, Belarusian?
Yep. They were building their new national artillery on trucks made by an ally of the invader. It was a total stopgap. You can't build a fleet on that.
So they needed a reliable partner. Enter the checks.
Exactly. Bohdana 3.0 moved to the Tatra 815-7. Great truck. Then, to streamline things even more, they moved to the Tatra Phoenix for version 4.0, which is actually a widely available civilian chassis.
That's smart. A spare part for a civilian truck is way easier to find. But 4.0 wasn't just a new truck, right? The gun itself got better.
Much better. The 4.0 introduced a semi-automatic loader. This is crucial. A 155mm shell weighs over 40 kilograms. That's almost 100 pounds.
That's back-breaking work for the crew.
It's exhausting, and it slows down your rate of fire. The semi-auto loader saves their backs and keeps the fire rate consistent. They also added armor to protect against Lancet drones.
And now we're at version 5.0, the current workhorse.
The 5.0 is on the Tatra Force chassis. It has a fully Ukrainian-made armored cabin, anti-drone nets from the factory. It's a mature, refined system.
And there's already a patent for a 6.0?
Bohdana 6.0 is the future. It's a modular artillery unit concept. Basically, the gun module isn't married to one specific truck. It can be dropped onto almost any heavy 8x8 platform, a MAN, a Mercedes, whatever.
That is genius. It makes the system immune to supply chain shocks. If one truck company has a problem, you just bolt the gun onto a different one.
Precisely. And that adaptability is what caught the eye of international investors. Because building 40 of these a month costs a fortune.
Which brings us to the money, the Danish model. When I first read that, I was thinking about, furniture not funding heavy artillery.
Well, in defense circles, this is revolutionary. Denmark was the first nation to directly finance weapons production inside Ukraine. Usually, a country buys weapons from their own companies and then ships them.
But they just sent the cash to Kyiv instead.
Effectively, yes. In January 2025, a deal for $538 million was finalized, funded by Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland. But here's the part that feels like poetic justice.
Yeah.
A huge portion of that funding comes from the windfall profits of immobilized Russian assets.
So let me get this straight. Russia invades. The West freezes Russian money. That money generates interest. And that interest is used to pay Ukrainian factories to build Bohdanas to shoot at the Russian army.
That is the loop. Russia is
Yeah.
literally, indirectly paying for the guns firing at them. It's a self-sustaining cycle of defense funded by the aggressor.
And it's efficient. The European money buys more guns if they're built locally in Ukraine.
Exactly. A Bohdana costs about $2.5 million, which is much cheaper than a French Caesar. And it keeps the Ukrainian economy running. Germany has now signed on, too, for a $750 million BAL deal to put 200 Bohdanas on Mercedes-Benz trucks.
Wow, Mercedes. That's a serious vote of confidence.
It integrates Ukrainian firepower with legendary German logistics. A very robust combination.
Okay, so they're building a lot they're paid for. But let's talk performance. Is this actually a good weapon? I mean, can it compete with something like the German PZH-2000, which is basically a spaceship on tracks?
That brings up the classic military debate. High-tech versus rugged. The PZH-2000 is incredible, in perfect conditions. But it's delicate. Its complex electronics don't like mud, dust, and constant shock.
And when they break, they're out of the fight for a long
A
time.
very long time. They often have to be shipped to Poland for repairs. The Bohdana, on the other hand, is designed for the reality of the front line. It's been described as fixing it with a hammer.
A hammer.
There's a great anecdote from a crew member, callsign Papa, who said he fixed one in the field with a hammer and a spare part from a tractor. You simply cannot do that with a PZH-2000.
And that translates to readiness. If you can fix it with a tractor part, you stay in the fight.
It does. The Bohdana maintains about an 80% operational readiness rate. The complex Western systems are often much lower. In a war of attrition, availability is a quality all its own.
What about the barrels? I know barrel wear is a huge issue.
This is where Ukrainian metallurgy really surprised everyone. A Western M777 barrel lasts about 2,500 rounds. The Ukrainian barrels are lasting 7,000 to 8,000 rounds.
Wow, that's triple the lifespan. That seems impossible.
It defies standard engineering timelines, but they applied their deep history of metallurgy to the problem and solved it incredibly fast.
So it lasts longer, it's easier to fix, and it shoots NATO ammo far.
Very far. Up to 42 kilometers with standard shells, 60 with rocket-assisted. Some soldiers even claim it's more accurate than the German systems in certain conditions.
That is high praise. So we have the truck-mounted gun, but the sources also mention a Bohdana B. What's that?
That's the towed variant. Imagine taking the gun module off the truck and putting it on a carriage with wheels.
Why do that? Isn't self-propelled always better? Shoot and scoot and all that?
It's much safer, yes.
Yeah.
But it's about economics. A self-propelled gun costs maybe $2.5 to $3 million. A towed one might be $1.5 million. It uses the exact same lethal barrel, but it's cheaper.
So it's about maximizing total firepower with the resources you have.
Precisely. But a gun is useless without ammo. Are they still reliant on partners for that?
That's the key question, isn't it?
This is the final piece of the sovereign arsenal puzzle. For 2026, the targets are ambitious. They're launching domestic production of 105mm shells, targeting 100,000 a year.
And the big 155s.
The target is 240,000 standard rounds and 60,000 extended range rounds just for 2026. The goal is for 95% of the components to be domestic by the end of this year.
That's a massive shift. From begging for shells in 2022 to producing hundreds of thousands by 2026.
It is. If you can make your own shells, you are less beholden to the whims of foreign elections. You fight the war on your own terms.
So what does this all mean when we zoom out? We're looking at a country that was written off in the first week, now running a military-industrial complex that rivals major European powers.
It's the definition of anti-fragility. The shock of the invasion didn't break their defense industry. It forced it to evolve at hyperspeed. The Bohdana is no longer just a weapon. It is proof of a mature industrial ecosystem that can sustain a long war.
And it's battle-tested in a way you just can't simulate.
Absolutely not. And that raises a provocative thought for the future. Ukraine has patented the Bohdana 6.0 for international markets after the war.
You're thinking exports.
Think about the global arms market. Russia used to be a primary supplier to the developing world. But now, their weapons are seen as inferior and their supply chains are a mess. There's a massive void opening up.
And Ukraine could step right into that void.
They could. They offer battle-hardened NATO-standard tech that is rugged, repairable, and cheaper than Western competitors. They could very well replace Russia as a major global arms exporter.
The brand recognition is certainly there. Bohdana is now a symbol of stopping a superpower.
Exactly.
That would be the ultimate turn of events. From fighting for survival to dominating the market. It shows that necessity isn't just the mother of invention, it's the mother of mass production.
And resilience. It's a lesson in never counting a dedicated engineering team out.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. This has been an incredible deep dive into the Bohdana. It's a story that I think we'll be studying for decades to come.
I agree completely. It really changes how we think about modern industrial warfare.
Absolutely. Before we sign off, remember to help us keep bringing you these stories. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.